And so we're going to talk about God as the breath of life tonight. And we think of when I say breath, uh, some of us get different word pictures, just like consuming fire. We have the picture of someone blowing out some candles. That's a popular one that we might think of. An athlete that gets tired from a race, who's huffing and puffing to get breath. Right now, I'm involved in a clinical study, actually, for allergies. I don't really have any allergies except for dust, and dust, I'm like off the charts. And so I'm kind of like their little dust freak in this allergy study. Well, I don't know why, but I have to do this breathing test every time I go in. And it's got like this little gun, kind of like you have the self-checkout, but it's got this little thing you breathe into. And just to make sure you don't cheat on it, they give you this like medical grade paper clip, clothespin that you have to put on your nose so that if she asks you a question and you answer, you sound like this. And I do this every time I go in, and I don't think the nurse realizes her part in the game here, because I have to do this like 3 times. And it's not like a little straw hole that you blow into. You can actually get some force, and you can feel like you can really, belabor some wind out of you. The hole's like the size of a golf ball, which if you've ever tried to breathe hard into something with the opening the size of a golf ball, it's like impossible to do anything for more than like a second. You're like, okay, but here's what happens. I stand there and I'm ready, and I'm like, got the thing, and I'm looking at the computer screen, and she's looking at the computer screen, and there's like this little, this little bell thing that your breath makes, and what you have to do is you have to get your breath to go like all the way up and then all the way down, and like keeps going down, and then like the area at the end is the area you think like you're gonna pass out, okay, and so this is how it happens. Jake, you ready? Go. That's my part. This is her part. Ready? Inhale. And every now and then, like, the loop doesn't go back, and she's like, oh, you didn't breathe right. I'm like, how do you mess this up? I'm still alive. Clearly, the cycle has completed itself. Your computer program is what is broken. But as relevant or irrelevant as that may be, I just want to share my pain with you. Breath is something that is so vital, yet at the same time we almost never think of. I mean, like, we're going through our lives. The very fact that we're able to think is proof that we have breath, because no oxygen, no brain function. And the breath of God is something we hear about from time to time, but while some of us don't think it's maybe essential to our existence, I promise you it is essential to our eternity. And we're going to look at a very famous, if you will, scene. It's in the book of Ezekiel, and it's in chapter 37. We're going to look at the first part of chapter 37. I'm going to kind of set the scene for you. Ezekiel is a Levite, and if you're familiar or not familiar with the Old Testament, there's 12 tribes from the 12 sons of Jacob. Now, they all have different names, but Levi is one of the more infamous ones or famous ones, because his line is where the priest descends. That's like the priestly line. And so Ezekiel is a prophet in the priesthood of Ezekiel. He's in the same period that Daniel is in. If you are familiar with Daniel in the lion's den, there's a really bad king named Nebuchadnezzar who kind of goes through all these different episodes with God. But you have a divided Jewish nation. When you read through the Old Testament, a lot of times you'll see Judah and Jerusalem, Israel and Judah, you'll see these two things which you think are kind of the same, but they're listed separately. And what it is, and we talked about this a little bit last spring, is you've got the northern kingdom, which is the 10 tribes. 10 of the 12 are in the north, and they're just kind of, at this point, they're kind of scattered around. It'd be like if you took a handful of salt, and you divided it into 12 equal pieces, those are your 12 tribes, and you took 10 of them, and you just kind of threw them on the grass. And you left the other two right there on the table. You could go find those 10 parts of salt. It'd take you a little while. They're just kind of dispersed. They don't really amount to anything. Nobody can really, feel like they're intimidated, if you will, by the presence of them. And so they're the northern kingdom, and the southern kingdom is the tribes of Judah and Benjamin. Now, Benjamin is a smaller tribe, so most of the time they just go by the name Judah. Well, they separated themselves because the 10 were not following God the way they thought they should be followed. And so Ezekiel comes along. This is a time where the northern kingdom, the 10, are scattered. They're kind of in disarray. They've had a lot of conflict and a lot of just people falling away from the Lord. And then the southern kingdom has fallen into captivity with Nebuchadnezzar. And so you have like despondency, you have depression, you have people who are scattered. There's no real hope on the horizon. And Ezekiel comes along with not a whole lot of good news. We talk about Ezekiel 37 more than anything else in Ezekiel because it's like one of the only pieces of good news in the book of Ezekiel. You go up, you start at like 30, 32, 33, and you go up to chapter 36, and it's like chastisement after judgment after punishment, and it's God just saying, not done what I've instructed you to do. This is why you're where you're at, and this is what's going to happen as a result of that. And then out of that, we come to Ezekiel 37. So it's a very bleak picture. This isn't like Ezekiel's having all these warm and fuzzy dreams, and God just gives him this vision. But we're going to go start in verse 1 of Ezekiel 37. It says, "The hand of the Lord was upon me, and he brought me out by the Spirit of the Lord and set me in the middle of a valley. It was full of bones." We're just going to do the first two verses right now. He says, "He led me back and forth among them, and I saw a great many bones on the floor of the valley, bones that were very dry." There's nothing that is 100% about this, but can I give you an educated opinion? The valley that he's talking about, more than likely, is the Promised Land. The Promised Land is the area around the Dead Sea. If you don't know, the Dead Sea is the lowest land surface on planet Earth. It is a quarter of a mile below sea level, 1,300 feet below sea level, which, if you're like me, you're like, that's once around the track. That doesn't seem like that's actually that far down. When you consider the floor of the Grand Canyon is 2,600 feet above sea level. It's a half mile above sea level, the floor of the Grand Canyon. So you get at the floor of the Grand Canyon, and you go down, straight down, 3/4 of a mile, and you'll get to the Dead Sea. And what happens is, we had Katrina come through years ago. New Orleans is like maybe 10 feet below sea level, for some perspective here. So the Promised Land is way down there. And this is the area that there has been just war after war after war after people killing each other, being invaded, people murdering each other. This is the area where Sodom and Gomorrah get destroyed. And so he's just like, he's in the spirit. He's not like in his physical self. It's just like God just brought his spirit out and was like, I want you to go through and like look at all the carnage around you. It's hundreds of years of people dying in this valley. And then he says this. He says in verse 3, he says, he asked me, "Son of man, can these bones live?" And I said, "Sovereign Lord, you alone know," which is way better than what I would have said. I'd have been like, no, I mean, I don't know. How would these live? These are bones. These are old, dry bones. And then he says this in verse 4. He says, then he said to me, prophesy to these son of bones and say to them, dry bones, hear the word of the Lord. Look, all of us in our lives touch people who their entire life and existence has been spiritually dry. They don't know Jesus. I guarantee you there are people down this street that you're in class and work with, that you see at a drive-through, that have never been to church, have never heard the gospel. And this is the first command that God gives Ezekiel, is he says, I want you to speak for me to this death around you. And then he goes on in verse 5. He says, this is what the sovereign Lord says to these bones. I will make breath enter you, and you will come to life. Verse 6, I will attach tendons to you and make flesh, and come upon you and cover you with skin. I will put breath in you, and you will come to life, and then you will know that I am the Lord. Most of us have been in a place in life at some point. Certainly we all have known people that you can have all the appearance of having it together and having life and be so dead it's not even funny. That's why you see people all the time that it's just so surprising that, I don't want to get off on a tangent here, but Robin Williams, somebody that has brought so much joy and laughter to the lives of millions of people, would take his own life. And you see this over and over and over again of people that you think like they have it all together, but the reality is they're just walking dry bones. There's no life in them. And the reality is, what God says here is he says, if you're not being breathed into by me, you're not living. And then he says this in verse 9. I'm sorry. Did I miss 7? Yeah, verse 7. I'm sorry. If you can just, for my sake, just leave the last verse up there so I can keep track. He says, so I prophesied as I was commanded. And I was prophesying, and there was a noise and a rattling sound, and the bones came together, bone to bone. Verse 8, and I looked, and the tendons and the flesh appeared, and on them was skin that covered them, but there was no breath in them. And if you take a little trip down memory lane, you realize that this may be a remarkably close picture to the formation of Adam, where God takes Adam. It's in Genesis chapter 2. If you just want to mark it and read it later. But it says in Genesis chapter 2, when God made him, verse 7, it says, then the Lord God formed a man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living being. God had already done what we might consider is the hard work in creating this person in all the intricacies right before him, but this is just a frame until there is life breathed into him. Verse 9. Then he said to me, prophesy to the breath, prophesy, son of man, and say to it, this is what the sovereign Lord says, come from the four winds, O breath, and breathe into these slain that they may live. Verse 10. So I prophesied as he commanded, did what he said, and breath entered them, and they came to life and stood up on their feet, a vast army. Now, when you hear him, command this, come from the four winds, it sounds like, the start of Sharknado. Like, it's like this, just torrent of wind coming through, but the word that he's using is not actually, it's not like what we would think like a rushing, powerful wind. It's more closely resembling a fragrance. Or if you took a candle and you snuffed out the candle and you see the little plume of smoke go up. That's the essence of that word. Um, and he says, when the breath entered them, two things happened immediately. They came to life, and they stood as a vast army. Now, we always have people, we know people, some of us may be those people, or you just kind of wonder whether or not we're really saved. I mean, that is a common question in the church today. And I can tell you out of this text, we get kind of two questions here. When you're dead, when we're dead, we can only stay dead. I mean, have you ever seen someone dead try to give themselves CPR? You know, it's like, you know, just gravity is only going to do so much here. And everything we do and try to do remarkably resembles someone dead doing it. Sorry. Anybody seen Weekend at Bernie's? Yeah. That movie creeps me out to this day. I watched it the first time when I was in high school, and I'm telling you, like, I wasn't saved when I was in high school. I didn't, you know, I couldn't watch it. It creeped me out. I'm like, that just gives me the willies. Like, you keep touching the dead guy. Or poking him with a stick. The reality is, life is not like Weekend at Bernie's. And it's very easy to identify someone who's dead, and it's very easy to identify someone who has life and breath. And so the question we get from this is, which do I resemble more? Very simple question. The second, which is a little more pointed to, I think, our evangelical church, if I can use that phrase, is, are you standing as a part of God's life inhalers? We have this vast army that Ezekiel is talking about, but the reality is, I mean, we had a conversation earlier this week about a program that a number of churches do in the southeast, in our area. We're not, you know, exclusive, and this is what happened. We get enough people kind of following our crowd, and we say, we don't need to be, we don't need you guys. We got our own thing. We can do this. You guys can be your army. We got our own little army. We're good. We're going to start we're going to recruit our own little army. Instead of saying, okay, is it possible for us to move more ground, to take more territory, taking our troops and joining them with this force, than it is to take our troops and to go over here and to start our own army? Because a pile of bones, if we think about this breathless form, we have this pile of bones, and here's kind of the way it translates for us today. You have an opportunity to serve or to give, or you have an opportunity to, I don't know, maybe sacrifice something in your life, in my life, that might bring the gospel, might bring God's breath to someone who is currently a dead pile of bones. It might require that, I don't know, we do something out of obedience even when it's uncomfortable. I mean, have you noticed how many times we think that God's calling us to something that we really want to do, or that we think is convenient, or we think like might be a good career move, but we don't actually think God's calling us to do things that hurt sometimes, or make us uncomfortable, or put us in a situation where it's kind of like risky, and it kind of might cost us something. Because what a pile of bones says is like, I think I'll pass. Because I got the thing at the place later on in the time, and I don't have TiVo, so that might mean I actually might miss it. I couldn't just watch it later, so I don't really know. I don't know about that. I don't know. But a life inhaler, someone who has life breathed into them, says, "Hey, I'm all in. When do we go?" When I lived up in New Jersey, told some of you last spring about some of my episodes in New York City. Here's another one. What I used to do, because I hated going into New York City, I went in most of the time on Fridays, and I would take the train in from out in New Jersey. It was about an hour and change train ride, and I'd get off at Madison Square Garden, and I would have my laptop in my backpack and my work shoes, and I'd wear tennis shoes, which a lot of people do. You look like an idiot until everybody else on the train has tennis shoes on, and I would walk, and I would fill the rest of my backpack space with bagged lunches. I would make lunches the night before, sandwiches, like good sandwiches, like an apple, like a cookie or a brownie or some chips or something. It was like a good lunch. And usually I could fit about 4 or 5 in my backpack, and I just looked for homeless people. On my way, I had about a 30, 35-minute walk, brisk walk, to my office. And so I would, sometimes I might not see anybody, or might see one person, and then I had 4. And so it was like this kind of, I don't want to say it was a game, but like it kind of like became the event. Like I didn't really look forward to work, but I looked forward to the walk there and the walk back, and was like, oh, I really want to see, like, who's God going to put in my path that I can just like, here's a sandwich. And there's one day I was walking to the office. It was on my way there. It was a morning, and it was in the fall, so it was kind of cool. And I'm walking past the library, the public library in New York City, and I'm sorry, I'm probably out of order. Can you pull the picture up? I tried to get a picture. Oh, here we go. Thank you. So I'm walking this way. So I am up here on the left by that tree, that one that's cut off on the screen. I'm all the way over there. And there is a guy, middle flight, there is a guy, homeless guy, sleeping on that middle flight of stairs. And so, just packed New York City, people walking to their offices. This is like 8 o'clock, 8:30 in the morning. Tons of people everywhere. And so I kind of like kneel down. The guy was sleeping, and they're not always sleeping. Sometimes they just pretend they're sleeping because they don't want to be told to move, because that's what you do when you're in New York and you're enforcing that kind of thing. And so I just kind of knelt down to him, and I was like, trying to ask him if he was hungry, and I couldn't tell if he was really asleep. If he's really asleep, he's on a marble slab. I don't want to wake him up because it probably took him a while to get to sleep. So, kind of trying to do that thing, and I start hearing this, when someone's like down the road yelling at their dog, and you just kind of have to look to see, are they yelling at you, or are they yelling at their dog, or are they yelling at somebody in the house? Like, you don't know what's going on. And so, like, I look over, and the crazy lady selling batteries is yelling at me. Like, the other side, over here, where the big lion is, like, she's over under that little red sign. I'm not kidding. She's, like, was not all there, and she was selling batteries right there. And she's yelling at me in the midst of all these people walking by, and I'm like, I'm trying to not draw a scene, not try to raise attention. I'm just trying to give the guy a sandwich, ask if he's, hungry. And she's yelling. And you know what she starts yelling? He's alive! He's not dead! And I'm like a deer in headlights. Like, I have no idea how to respond, and she keeps yelling, and I'm like, okay, we gotta mitigate the situation. And so I start like walking over on the steps to her, because I'm like, I don't know what to do to get the crazy lady to shut up and stop yelling. And so I left the bag at the guy, and like, I don't remember the full sequence of the conversation, but I got the whole story. I got the whole story, where the batteries come from, who she sells them to, like, the whole 9 yards for like 15 minutes. When people look at our lives from a distance, is it that easy to tell that we're alive, that we have breath in us that makes us different, that makes us alive, that, you look at my life, you look at your life, and you're like, that person is different. They are all in for something that I have no part of. Not that it's a place of superiority, but I'm telling you, it's a marking on our lives when God has breathed into us. And we go on to verse verse 11, chapter 37. He says, "Then he said to me, Son of man, these bones are the whole house of Israel." Remember, 10 tribes separated from 2 tribes. He's saying, this is everyone. They say, our bones are dried up and our hope is gone. We are cut off, because this is the heart of these people. You have 10 tribes that are scattered. You've got people occupying their land that God promised he would give to them. You've got the 2 that tried to stay faithful. They're now like in a worse condition. It's like our hope is gone. And then he says, verse 12, he says, "Therefore prophesy and say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says, O my people, I'm going to open your graves and bring you up from them. I will bring you back to the land of Israel." Verse 13, "Then you, my people, will know that I am the Lord when I open your graves and bring you up from them. I will put my spirit in you, and you will live, and I will settle you in your own land. Then you will know that I, the Lord, have spoken, and I have done it, declares the Lord." And this is a foreshadowing of God bringing the nation of Israel back together a little over 50 years ago. And this is a prophetic picture of Jesus coming to take Jew and Gentile and unite them under one eternal king. Because the reality is, we can have all the faculties of a person who is alive, but without the Spirit of God within us. Can you put verse 14 back up? Without the Spirit in us, we're spiritually dead and lifeless. He says, "I will put my Spirit in you, and you will live." Okay, now check this out. We jump from there all the way to the crucifixion. In Luke 23, verse 46, Luke says this, "Jesus called out with a loud voice, 'Father, into your hands I commit my followers. I commit my mission. I commit my family. I commit my ministry.' No," he says, "I commit my spirit." And when he had said this, he breathed his last. Because when the spirit leaves, the breath leaves. And the power of God's breath is not in his forcefulness, it's in his very presence. And the amazing thing to me in this scene is the irony that the descendants of Adam, who God formed and was lifeless until God breathed the breath of life into Adam, his descendants are now ending the life of God, whose breath resulted in their own lives. Do you see the cycle here? God breathes into this lifeless person named Adam. Adam has many descendants. Jesus comes along. Some of those descendants decide they're going to kill Jesus, who was the breath that entered Adam to begin with. And then Jesus gives up his spirit, and we have life because Jesus breathed his last. We have life because when Jesus said, "I commit my spirit," he said, "I'm letting my spirit go out of this one body so that it can go into everybody." And if that cycle didn't happen, we would be in a world of trouble. And so when we think of God breathing, I'm a visual person, as you'll find out if you haven't already. God is not trying to blow this candle out from 100 yards away. You ever tried to blow a candle out from like this far away? Like a few feet? We just had a friend of ours that had a birthday recently, and of course her husband decided it'd be funny to get trick candles. which I think probably ends after high school unless you're, him. But you don't want to look like an idiot when you're blowing a candle out, so you get like right up on it, and like you give it like all your might. And we think that God is holy and we're sinful and we're separated from God, and He's just like, oh, I hope my breath can get there. Oh, I better give it a good one. We only got one shot at this. But here's the reality. God is not trying to extinguish a flame from 100 yards away. He's trying to bring one to our candle. Because our lives are pointless without a flame. And you know that your life is breathing the breath of God when the same flame that came and gave you life and purpose is the same one that you have. You take God's flame and you get His flame in your life, and then your flame looks like His flame. God's breath is what resurrects the dead. It's what brings purpose and hope and redemption out of graves. I mean, you look at the last couple verses, you don't need to go back, but if you look at the last couple verses, He's saying, I'm going to take this lifetime of death and grave that this area has seen, and I'm going to bring life out of it, and it's going to happen because I'm going to put my Spirit in you. And this is 600 years before Jesus comes on the scene. And God is able to bring redemption through all of the death and the graves in our lives, through the bad decisions, through the lies, the sinfulness, the filth, and to take it and to actually take something that people see as attractive and warm and beautiful. And if there were no other lights made by man in this room, and we killed off all the lights, everybody would be staring at that one little flame. Without God's Spirit in us, we are an impressive heap of bones, or a candlestick without a flame. And then Paul closes us down in Ephesians chapter 2. If you've never read the book of Ephesians, it is a great book. You can read it tonight. And he says this, "But because of His great love for us, God, who is rich in mercy, made us alive with Christ, even when we were dead in transgressions. It is by grace you have been saved. And God raised us up with Christ and seated us with Him in the heavenly realms in Christ Jesus, in order that in the coming ages, in order that in 2014, He might show His incomparable riches of His grace expressed in His kindness to us in Jesus." We get to be seated and positioned with Christ because He gave up His Spirit. The Spirit that came from God, that was God. And we think of this simply as God's Word. But I would submit to you this is more of God's breath for your soul. That this book is oxygen for life. And so, if you aren't surrendered, if you want to go ahead and pull up the last video, that'd be great. If we're not surrendering our lives to Jesus on a daily basis, we're cutting ourselves off from this. We're trying to give ourselves CPR. Do we wonder why things don't turn out the way they should? Because this candle can't light itself. It needs the flame from somewhere else to bring it to it in order to serve its purpose. And I just ask you tonight, some of us got together last week and gave out some of these cards on campus. These are not specifically for the North Georgia, but we have some more in the back. This may be the first step in bringing that breath of God, that flame, to someone's life. Just extending a simple invitation and a sandwich. And this is for you. In the back of all the seats, there's one of these Wahoo cards. Name and email. If you've already done that, you don't need to put your email on there. But very simply, why are you here? You can go into whatever level of detail you want if you want to share anything on that. But our hope is that this is a process of growth and of change. And so if there's something more personal you'd like to talk about later, put that on there. Let us know that we can follow up with you on that. If there's something that you're just not sure of, that you want to talk more about from a biblical standpoint, a faith standpoint, a God standpoint, just put that on there. If there's anything that we can do to make it a little easier for your soul to breathe, we're here for that. But our hope is that we would not be satisfied with a candlestick that has no flame on it in our lives or in the lives of those around us. And so I'm going to pray, and then we're going to close with one short video. So God, our hope tonight is that your breath would enter us. Some of us, it may need to re-enter. God, your life and your hope and your joy and all of that comes from you would fill us through your breath. And God, if we know that we're dead, God, that we would, in no contrived words, in no pre-planned prayer, that we would just ask you in sincerity of heart to breathe in us the breath of life that we know for a fact is missing. God, would you use this to draw us closer to you? And we ask this in Jesus' name.